Hello and welcome to episode 104 of Kaiju Curry House. I'm your regular host, Joe, and tonight I am joined by creature designer extraordinaire, Peter Konig. Peter, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing tonight? Or today, I should
Very
say, in your
well.
time zone.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on. Very
Yeah,
cool.
well, it is absolutely my pleasure, and we have a load of great questions for you tonight, and hopefully we'll hear some really cool information about the creature development process.
Sure.
So, we like to start with everybody's favorite dad pun, mine included. What have Kaiju been up to? Peter, I got to pick on you. So, what have you been doing recently that is within the realm of large, dangerous, scaly things or monsters?
I mean, large scale things and creatures of various kinds. I work at a game studio, so I'm on the development team there. We're working on a new game. It's probably Monsters and Cauldron Studios. And so been designing creatures behind the scenes in solitude as we're developing this new game. Um, so yeah, creatures are kind of an everyday thing for me.
Do we get to know what the game is?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, bummer.
Yeah, we're
So
we're
the
pretty
large,
early
dangerous, and
on, but
scaly, or are they kind of like shambly, or are they like
every shape and form you can think of. There's just a lot of them. So yeah,
very cool? All right. So to explain your role, you've worked on pretty much everybody's favorite films. At least if you're listening to this podcast, I'd hope to think that some of these are your favorite films. You've been involved with Jurassic Park, you've been involved with Starship Troopers, Cloverfield, Dragonheart, which we want to talk about a lot tonight, and a variety of other fantastic films. So, you want to walk through what you do?
yeah, sure. Well, currently I'm doing a lot of concept in 3D, but I started out in the early days in the 80s, being wanting to be a creature shop guy, doing physical creatures, costumes, and that sort of thing. Back in the animatronics days, and I mean, it's still a thing, but back then that was the only game in town if you wanted to make creatures and work on movies. So I kind of started with that in mind. Um, Primarily, I was interested in being a sculptor and kind of taking any kind of creature job I could get. And yeah, started off with low budget movies, and my area was kind of near special makeup effects in the early days. I didn't do a lot of makeup myself, but that's kind of where I got going with, like, low budget zombie movies and things like that. And
So, suit and makeup effects is kind of where.
yeah, and puppets and whatever. Um, yeah, because I was inspired by, like, the same stuff a lot of people were inspired, my generation, like the Star Wars and Dark Crystal and all that stuff. It's like I wanted to figure out how to get into that from a very young age. And so yeah, that's where I started, was film, and gravitated towards sculpting after messing around with lots of things as a kid. And yeah,
So,
that's where I got going.
what kind of materials do you mess around with as a kid? So, were you like into clays? Did you take
Yeah,
like.
yeah. I mean, back then it was not much information on how things were done, so there's a lot of experimentation and bedroom messes in your bedroom and your mom's kitchen and stuff like that, trying out different materials and things you've heard of, foam rubber, and melting clay and getting it on the carpet, all that sort of stuff. It's like back then, pre-internet, there just wasn't tons of info, so you really had to, like, look at magazines and the rare TV show about the making of a particular movie or something like that, or TV show, and you just sort of made it up, and gradually acquired the knowledge, minimal knowledge. Really, it was really hard to get very sophisticated as a teenager. But yeah, it was just a lot of messing around. I mean, when I was really young, I used to make, like, articulated masks out of just, like, masking tape, and cardboard, and or foam rubber, that I get out of some
I
you
feel
know,
like I'm nervous to ask this because a significant amount of teenagers listen to this podcast, but where does a teenager get foam rubber?
just like the kind of stuff you see in a mattress or you know,
Oh, okay. So just
an old
like,
sofa, and you hear through hints here and there. It's like, oh, the Henson people, they use they use like uh, electric knife like you would use for Thanksgiving on the foam rubber to kind of carve and shape it. And so I would get my mom's electric knife and this old foam rubber and try to do it myself and have all kinds of problems because I don't know what I'm doing. And yeah, it was just a real like tape and rubber bands kind of beginning,
I really
like a
enjoy
lot of people.
your parents' strategy there. Let's give him an electric knife in the mattress and let him have at it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that doesn't really cut you, but it will cut the cooked turkey. So it wasn't too
Mm.
dangerous. But yeah, or like X-Acto knives and things like that, and cutting foam rubber up. And there are definitely some accidents here and there, but not too many.
So you've brought up basically Jim Henson twice
Hmm.
now already. Was he a major influence?
Totally. Yeah. Early on. I mean, I was one of the kids that they made Sesame Street for back in the what was it? It came out in like 69 or 70. So I was like the 3 or 4 year old at that age that it was sort of pointed at. And just I think early on, just those great puppets and things like that really kind of sparked my imagination. Um, they're just so well crafted and acted, and depending on your personality as a little kid, sometimes things just sort of grab hold of you. And but then at the same time, they're always showing old Ray Harryhausen movies on TV and uh, Godzilla, of course. I see all your Godzilla stuff back there. Godzilla is a huge. I think the first thing I sculpted in clay was an attempt at Godzilla, uh, like in
Yeah,
first
he's a,
grade.
to be fair, his tripod stance makes him a pretty easy target for an early sculptor.
Yeah, I didn't even start with the whole body. I remember doing just I remember his foot and legs so much from the squashing of buildings. I think I started off just sculpting a big clawed foot in elementary school, and yeah, that's kind of the stuff that keyed me off back then. And there were just a lot of great movies that they would run on TV on the weekends and stuff. Planet of the Apes. With their great makeups,
Classic.
or all those kinds of things. Kind of sparked my imagination. But
So to,
Henson in particular, it's like his stuff got more and more sophisticated over the years in the movies and the Muppet Show. Like the Muppet Show had such great, big costumes and things, and there was just kind of there's kind of a magic to how that stuff was constructed and filmed and worn. Like the players who wore the stuff um, really brought it to life, and it just wasn't obvious how it was done. And I think just the mystery of that stuff and how it was created was really interesting at the time, and got me, more and more interested as time went on. And then, his other films came out, Dark Crystal in particular, and that stuff was just so incredible, especially for the time. It's like we look at it now and we're more sophisticated uh, in our viewing, and we can kind of tell it's, rubber puppets and all that stuff. But just the world building and the storytelling and the depth of the world,
it
and
had lore. That's the
the
thing.
detail really felt real. Even though watching it when it was a new thing, sure you knew it was puppets and costumes, but your mind kind of let you believe in the world. So yeah, that stuff was fantastic, and for kind of a naturally creative kid, it really lit a fire in my head.
So to ask you a question that might follow you around the rest of your life, um, who is your favorite Muppet?
Hmm. Uh, that's a good question. Favorite Muppet? Um,
I'm going to say you can't go vanilla and say Kermit.
no, no, no. Kermit was kind of like the straight man. Uh, I think Gonzo really.
Gonzo's a solid pick. Mine is Fozzie Bear. I'm
Fozzie Bear. I mean, they're hard to beat, right? I like the articulation in Gonzo, though. He had the eyelids and stuff like that. Whenever they had
Yeah.
like a little bit of motion in their faces, I really enjoyed that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's hard to pick. They had such great actors for those things, and yeah, incredible. Uh,
The
Grover
original.
was yeah, Grover's not from the Muppet Show, but man, that character was such a big part of my childhood. I just love that guy.
If we're talking Sesame Street, I'm going to go with Mr. Snuffleupagus, who
Oh yeah,
it took me
that
to my
stressed me
adult
out,
life.
man.
My adult life, I found out that he was Big Bird's imaginary friend.
Oh really? You didn't realize that
It,
part?
it, it took me that long,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
But the things that you find out. So when I think about like all the creatures that you've been involved with, have any characteristic traits, say from like Jim Henson or Harryhausen, leaked into any of your designs? Is there like a favorite thing? I've always noticed that with Harryhausen, he liked beaks. So like the emir from 20 Million Miles to
Mm.
Earth, originally it was supposed to have a beak. And he has lots of beaked creatures, and I've noticed that that kind of bleeds into a lot of the designs.
Sure.
Is there a favorite hallmark design that you would say has gone into any of yours?
Not really a particular feature like that, but I mean, I think one of my biggest inspiration was Rick Baker and with his makeup effects through the 80s. And I think the thing that always stuck with me and really inspired me back then was just the level of realism that he was able to get.
Yeah, we've talked about
Uh,
Rick several times.
yeah, and like his stuff was some of the first stuff I saw that felt very believable. Um, just as sculptures, these natural qualities he would put into the clay sculptures. Um, a lot of makeup effects people know this one image that Rick had in, like, I think it was Fangoria or Cinefex, of him sculpting this troll character, and it's just this head on a that he's sculpting, and there's like these details around the ears, skin folds, and the weight of the skin and stuff like that. And it was kind of seeing these like very fine, believable details that kind of ingrained in me that I really wanted to pursue, just like believability and naturalism in the stuff I did. And I think the thing that I've tried to carry through everything I do, whether it's very stylized or realistic, is just a level of character in the look and the feeling, even looking at something that's not moving, that it has a history or an inner life to it. And it's not just, I never wanted to make anything that felt generic or lifeless, even
Mhm.
if it's kind of scary and outlandish. I'm trying to get a certain level of natural. I want someone to think that this creature has a behavior and an intelligence of some kind behind it, that's kind of linked to the natural world. So that's the kind of stuff that kind of stuck with me, is like the character. I don't know what the term would be for it, but the characterness of a creature, or a character, a more humanoid character.
The
Um,
anthropomorphizing or the characterization? Would that be about right?
that kind of lends to, like, you know putting human traits on things, but more like, you believe this thing has a life beyond what you see, and a little more,
Imbuing a soul into the character, you'd
yeah, a
say.
bit of depth to the character, whatever it happens to be. Um, some things don't need it as much if you're doing like a fish or something, but
Yeah.
you don't want it to look too thoughtful. But yeah, just that level of naturalism and believability has always been sort of something I've leaned into when it was appropriate.
So taking that train of thought, so you were involved in Jurassic Park, which is, if you talk about special effects, you kind of have to mention Jurassic Park at this
Right.
point because it was trend setting in
Yeah.
both practical and digital effects, I feel.
Right.
So when you talk about imbuing character into creatures, Jurassic Park for me seems like a really good takeoff point with that because on the one hand, you have animals, And I'm aware that you had, I think it was Jack Horner, who was the paleontological advisor for Jurassic Park, and he wanted to stick very rigidly to the science, but at the same time, you have to give the creature a certain character. You could argue now in Jurassic World Dominion, we have really come quite far with that because we have raptors being somewhat friendly with people.
Mm.
But I dare say, like, the anti-hero of the franchise, the big female T-Rex, Rexy or Roberta, whichever way you swing there, she has a character. So what character traits did you bring in creature design, would you say, to Jurassic Park, or were you going for straight accuracy there?
Yeah, well, for me, I didn't do any creature design on Jurassic Park.
Okay.
I was involved in
The
I,
animatronics?
I was brought to her to Tippett for back before it was a CG film, and originally it was going to be stop motion puppets. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people know the story how Spielberg and decided to go with the ILM techniques after he saw those tests that we all saw back then. And so my job originally was to take Stan Winston's sculpts, make molds of them, and do the foam running and mold making and painting uh, to match the large scale puppets that they made, and for the Tippett stop motion animators to we would put animation rigs in these puppets and they'd be animated. So originally my job was very different, and it was more fabrication and mold making.
Right, right.
Um, and like within a couple of weeks of getting my job at Tippett, everything changed on us, and suddenly I wasn't doing the same thing anymore. What my job turned into, though, is working on. We still made the molds and roughly painted up these dinosaur puppets, but it was for the animatics, which sort of scoped out these bigger CG shots that they were doing. And part of it was because the stuff was so hard to do back then. Having some moving storyboards like we made with the Hub Motion was a huge help to kind of compose these shots and figure them out ahead of time.
Almost like
Um,
rotoscope.
no, not really. It's more like storyboarding, but with the added bonus of motion, because
Yeah,
they had
so
to.
like you had that, and then the animators would come in and essentially like use that as a jumping platform, so to speak.
Well, even before they filmed the live action that went around it, it's like, what is this shot? Let's plan where the actors are going to stand. How big is this creature going to be? So it would help them sort of frame up the shot and get everything together. So on the day, they know what they're filming and they know where they're aiming with the visual effects later down the road. And because back then it was like so tedious time wise and expense wise to right now you can rattle off CG shots much quicker, but back then it was all like just beginning really, and all these things took so much more effort. So luckily we were our shop was able to previs all these things for some of the key sequences and eventually actually animate some of the actual shots in the film. But yeah, my job was just to mold and cast the foam rubber stuff um, with a few other folks that were there at the time.
So to
And which
add,
it was just kind of interesting to be a fly on the wall during this big change that
I'm
happened.
sure.
Yeah.
I got another question for you then, though. So you said you painted a few of the dinosaurs, or at least like the puppets that you were
Yeah.
using. So I haven't read it because I've got the dog-eared copy of Making of Jurassic Park
Right.
in my little library. The color decisions for the dinosaurs, I've never seen anything about that. I've
Mm,
seen like we took the Dilophosaurus's frill from a frilled lizard. I've seen like
yeah.
Jack Horner hated like the tongue velociraptors, like a monitor
Right.
lizard, like little decisions like that. Like, okay, we've got documentation on that. But you as a person was there any creative decision that you ever saw, or like as like when you were painting these maquettes, did someone say like we want the T-Rex to be brown because
Yeah. I wasn't in on the discussions at Stan Winston's studio at all, but I'm sure part of their thought process was to kind of keep things low key and not too extravagant looking, and kind of find a naturalistic texture and pattern apply to these things. I think the fact that they were in the frame at all was kind of exciting enough. They didn't have to make them too crazy in color, but I'm sure there were lots of discussions they had about where to go with these things because they don't know. Obviously, they can only sort of make educated guesses um, based on animals today. So that's yeah. I think
It's just one of
I
those
think
things. But
I think they were
figured,
smart, keeping it kind of low key and not going too crazy with some of the the larger creatures. It seems like the larger an animal is in the real world, the less extravagantly colored they are,
Mhm.
um, depending on their role in the the pecking order and the food chain. The level of camouflage versus not needing camouflage. All these
Exactly.
things. I'm sure they had long chats about it, but for us, it was just like there's the stand stuff, and we're just gonna roughly copy it so that our shots are not completely different looking. But
Right.
yeah,
So
I was such a junior guy there. I think I was like 23 years old or something, or 22,
what a
something like
job,
that.
though.
And yeah, it was great. It was a lucky break and weirdly timed sort of situation because I'd worked across the street at another effects shop in LA from Stan Winston's studio, and I had friends at Stan's, and when this was starting to happen, I started hearing stories from people who worked over there across the street at lunches and things like that. And uh, just the hints of what was happening and what the movie was going to be, where it was kind of crazy. Like a number of us sort of thought, you know what, from what we're hearing, it sounds like we need to buy computers, and start learning this stuff.
Yeah, I
And it
read
was,
on one of it's ArtStation, I think, that you took Phil Tippett's mentality of sink or swim, or
yeah, definitely,
yeah,
definitely. But it was also fun. It wasn't just survival, but it was exciting stuff and new stuff and very attractive to learn. But yeah, I was working at LA in LA at the time, and as Jurassic was gearing up, and I did try to get on the Stan Winston crew back then, but obviously his main guys had all the big sculpting jobs, and by the time I had heard about it, there weren't that many positions open. I think I heard about what they call a toes and tails job, possibly,
nice.
which means here you sculpt this thing that's no one's going to see, the bottoms of the feet or something like that. But even that, I never got in the door, and it just so happened that Phil called up for that job and managed to get that job and move back up to the Bay Area, which is where I was from. So yeah, it was a weird time and a weird bunch of coincidences, and yeah, I was lucky to be around. Like just being around it as it was happening was kind of enough for me.
Were there any like awe-inspiring moments? Like, did you see like a life-size dinosaur like one day? Like you walk in, it's just like, wowza. Do you have any moments
Um,
like that you'd like to share?
I just think when we all saw the the T-Rex tests that Steve Williams and Mark DePay were doing at ILM, we had the footage of those first tests at Tippett, and we all sat around watching this on a loop, being replayed over and over again on film, and just that moment of like, because when you first saw seeing it now, we all see the flaws and how imperfect it is, but at the time, it was so incredible and so obviously a heavy moment that it was just kind of awe-inspiring to see this big jump in technology and to know that no one else had seen it yet. Like you're kind of some of the first eyeballs to see this, um, and just to kind of think about what this means for your job and the industry in general. Like it's not like we had all that wisdom right off the bat. At first, it was just you're just kind of trying to make sense of it, and you're kind of worried about what it means for you, just like as far as your day to day making a living goes. It's like, oh, they're changing everything we're doing. Okay, now what does that mean? Does that mean I'm out of work? And should I start looking for work elsewhere? And all that kind of stuff. It was a bit is awe-inspiring and scary and impressive, and like all these things happening at once. And it certainly was a big deal for Phil, obviously, because it really affected his livelihood, and what he spent his whole life getting good at was going to change. And it's an interesting moment to be a part of, even as a little junior shop guy there. But yeah, other than that, like visuals, I mean, just seeing the Winston sculpts from the different folks, and we had copies of a lot of the stuff in the maquette scale, up at Tippett, and just these great, like, I don't think I'd seen such well sculpted dinosaurs before. So seeing copies of that stuff in person and getting to really look at it and study it is really pretty amazing. I don't know if I was up to snuff to sculpt something like that myself at that age. But yeah, just that stuff alone was pretty impressive. It was also cool when we had paleontologists from Berkeley come in and do these talks with the animators, and sitting in on that and hearing their opinions on dinosaur motion and all these things, and behavior that, from what they could put together as paleontologists. Just getting to hear this stuff from the professionals was really a cool thing too.
Yeah, it must have been really fun, to be fair. I mean, to listen about like a whole bunch of really...
it was exciting. Yeah, it was exciting. Just lots happening, and big things changing, and suddenly getting all these computers into the studio that you thought it's just like you and everyone else you're working with are suddenly turning on a dime, and trying to adapt on the fly. Like there's like a lot of people have had the experience of learning on the job, not really being sure of what you're doing. And that was kind of like the whole studio at the time was like, let's all switch gears now at once and try to get this all to work. And it worked out in the end. It was super stressful for the folks running everything there. But yeah, it's just one of those rare times in your life where there's a lot happening, and it feels like big stuff. And it's also a time in my career where I was learning a lot anyway, learning to sculpt and learning to do all these different crafts. And whenever you're learning a lot fast, it's kind of a fun time. Everything's very interesting. It's not all repetition and doing what you did last year and the year before over and over again in different ways. It's like everything new.
Yeah. Well, that was 93, as I understand it. So about 3 years later, we had Draco to tackle. And with the exception, I think, of the jaws and the hand, he was digital, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And you had a big hand in bringing him to life, or at least, the design process of Draco, correct?
Yeah. It was, one of those interesting and lucky jobs that landed in my lap, because I happened to be there at Tippett. And yeah, it was a big one, because we knew right off the bat that this is a lead character. We'd already been doing the Starship Troopers stuff and maquettes there, and well, actually, I came after, but
so Dragonheart as a film, a lot of us have a very warm soft spot in our heart for this movie. Basically, you get to see a whole bunch of Harry Potter characters act really diabolical.
Yeah.
About an hour and a half. But
well, for a lot of people, I run into a lot of people that grew up with that as their kid movie.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did when I was preparing for our interview tonight is I actually went on a site called commonsensemedia.com. And
Hmm.
basically what this site is you can look up pretty much any movie and is it or is it not kosher for kids to watch? And at what age should your kids watch
Gotcha.
it? And what are the landmines in this film that you should look out for?
Hmm.
Dragonheart, by far and large, passes a lot of tests. And it's kind of funny in that sense because, in terms of swearing, overt bloodshed, um, bad moral decisions, things like that, it's a very stick up for the right cause film.
Drug
And it's
use.
kind of like,
Not too much
pardon?
drug use. Not too much language and drug use and
Yeah, it
blood.
has no drug use. I think at one point at a dinner table, you might see a liquid which could be
It might be
alcoholic,
wine. Yeah.
maybe gets spilled over. And most of like the dramatic deaths occur out of sight. So like Einan's father, the bad king, he gets killed in the middle of a mob. You don't see what they're doing with him. You see all of the sharp objects going up and down, but you don't like see it.
Yeah, yeah.
And Einan kills his mother, but you don't see it. So in a sense, it's very Disney-esque because like a character might fall off a cliff, but you don't see, like the thing.
Foam,
It's
foam
just
sticking out
implied.
of. Yeah.
But yeah, so Common Sense Media rates Dragonheart at like an age 11.
Hmm.
And it's been interesting to see the ratings for it change over time because when it came out, it was a PG-13 film.
Right.
And now, at least in the United Kingdom where I'm at, it is a PG film. So it's dropped down a little bit in terms of
Mhm.
like you can watch. Now, I should also argue that Jaws has been rated PG, and we know that that film traumatizes young children. So parents at your own discretion. But I think part of the magic of Dragonheart is it gave it gave kids a dragon that they could latch onto that wasn't scary and villainous like Vermithrax or
Hmm.
Maleficent. And he wasn't goofy like Elliot and Pete's dragon. He was a very noble character.
Right.
And
Right. Right.
he's fantastic in that sense. Of course, Sean Connery gives him that great sly, I've seen the world kind of like
Hmm.
not necessarily a holier than thou attitude, but like I've been around and you're a youngling sort of vibe.
I
But
think I think the idea was kind of like they were both knights in one way or another. Like John,
yeah.
the dragon was as a knight in the sort of way that the knight was.
So in the design process, I've seen some of your early maquettes for Draco, some of like the designs that were pitched to the director, Rob Cohen. And then like through process of elimination, you're like, I like the horns, but can we make the nose bigger or stuff like
Sure.
that? Like I've seen some of the process for that. And at one point, I think there was also an animatronic dragon that was produced for test screening of the picture because when Dennis Quaid and Draco were talking around a fire camp, I think that was used by the producer to get more funds for the film or to like just as kind of like a reel to show what this film could be, a dragon and a knight buddy copying it together. And
Hmm.
that dragon looks quite different from what Draco ended up being. That dragon
No,
looks more like Saphra from Aragon, I'd say. There's limited footage
I
of
haven't I
it.
haven't seen this at all. Yeah, I didn't
Oh
even know
yeah,
it.
it's got kind of like a beaky snout. It's got like a
Hmm.
long, slender neck. It's just kind of like what you'd imagine, just like a wyvern or something like that, to like look at. But it doesn't have
Something
Draco's
something
facial
traditional.
structure or
Sure.
stockiness, I should say.
Right.
So where did we start with Draco?
Um, well, the design process was, um, how do I characterize it? Well, in the beginning, the idea was to do a bunch of two-dimensional designs, but the fact was that I just couldn't draw well enough back then. Uh, that wasn't my focus. I was more focused on three-dimensional sculpting. So when Phil's like, let's draw some get some dragon designs on paper, and I started drawing. It's like, this is not really what I do. Back then, I presented these attempts at dragon design to Phil. He's like, I can't present this. This is just not, cutting it. And yeah, I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm a sculptor. I figure these things out in three-dimensional ways. And so we switched gears, and I ended up doing a bunch of super sculpey maquettes, and really fast, like I think very, very rough form, just very basic shapes, and cardboard cutout, wings and things like that, just to kind of get a feel for the general shape and give a lot of variations that the director could look at.
I'll stop you right here,
I was
because
going to say,
not everybody knows what super
bring up,
sculpey is.
yeah, it's a polymer clay.
Yeah, so yeah, is it a two-part super sculpey?
Nope, you just sculpt it, and then when you're ready, you stick it in the oven.
Oh, okay,
bake
right.
it. Then it gets hard. I don't know if it would be helpful for people watching this. Are there people watching this as well?
Yeah, we put it up on YouTube we have a lot of
I can share my I can share my ArtStation page.
Okay, brilliant. So for folks that are listening along, Peter has gone to his ArtStation page, which we will list in the description, and it shows a variety of fabulous things that he has been working on.
Right. Okay, I'll try to make it descriptive for people listening. Anyway, way down here we have Dragonheart and a few old pictures. I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have pictures of all the maquettes we did back then. A lot of them just got destroyed over the years because they were just these small little sculpts, maybe a few inches tall. But
so this one that you're showing us now, it looks pretty, to be fair, it looks pretty close to the final design. But what I would say is that Draco has kind of a crest going along the midline of his back, which, I mean, I don't know if those are necessarily flowing spines or if they're rigid, but they all, I mean, like from this two-dimensional image, they almost look Godzilla-esque, and like his plates going down the back. Not massive by any means, but they almost have that kind of like pointed Christmas tree design.
Yeah, all the details in this stage of the design process were all like placeholder level details. The one thing, and I think this was from like the second round of stuff we showed the director. I can't remember because this ages ago, but we tried to emphasize the fact that this is a speaking character that had, a mouth that would have to articulate and a face that would have to act. So a lot of the emphasis was the fact that, this guy would have to gesture with his arms in some way and, act in a kind of, like we were saying, anthropomorphized way, somewhat human, since he was going to have so much screen time. So this particular rough model was the one that the director gravitated towards in terms of just basic body shape and proportions. It doesn't have any wings. It doesn't have a tail. If you turn this thing around, there's nothing sculpted on the back. It's just like
it's meant for like one picture.
Yeah, just one visual grab when you see it, and that hopefully will tell you what you need. And it just has a rough wash of paint over it. And so yeah. And
out of curiosity, what
how far?
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, as far as like details, like you're pointing out that crest and stuff, like none of the details are really worked out. It was just kind of, here's roughly what the arms and legs might be, and more, the very, very basics. And then the details will be worked out later.
So how far into the design process was the decision made to give Draco a sixth limb, like classic dragon design, as opposed to what we see in the modern era with, like, say, Smaug from The Hobbit, where Smaug has like hands, but they're also his wings, So when did we decide to give him proper like hands?
Yeah, the way I remembered it was that they really emphasized the acting side of what this guy had to do.
Hmm.
and the idea that they were going to be, sitting by a campfire talking and things like that. And I think it's hard to remember the specific conversations, but the general gist of it was this creature needs to articulate and use his hands to speak, and lay down and still be able to get into the frame with the actor and have kind of a believable conversation that's kind of emotional or whatever. And freeing up the arms seemed like a thing to try at least. And I
Hmm.
think when Rob Cohen, the director, saw the particular design that sort of did that, because originally I had these in the earlier maquettes. I tried to make some of them realistic, like how big would the wingspan have to really be to lift this however many 1,000-pound creature in the air? And of course, it's like, bigger than a 747's wingspan to really sell it. Um, so we knew that, and they weren't going to go for that. So we knew we had to cheat it to a certain degree. Um, but yeah, like focusing on the character side of the dragon was just kind of a necessary thing. You had to believe it when you saw it acting and speaking and all this stuff, and it had
Those
to
are
have a personality, and it had to reflect, Sean Connery. Uh, you're hiring this famous actor. It should really feel like that voice could be coming out of this animal. Um, so yeah, it was an interesting puzzle to figure out, and a lot of it was done in the early part of the design process by throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and then getting feedback and then going at it again.
Were there any
Um,
classic dragons that you thought about when you were throwing ideas against the wall?
uh, None in particular. Uh, I definitely looked at all the stuff like the Vermithrax and things like that, but there weren't a lot of things to look at back then that I could kind of pull out of popular media.
There wasn't really a benevolent, realistic dragon up until this point, to be fair.
Yeah, and I think I ended up looking at a lot more dinosaur reference than anything else.
You can see that in his hind feet for sure, at least on this maquette.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, we need to sell this thing as realistic, so let's look at the best paleo art we can to kind of borrow from that as much as possible. And then once we got approval from this, it was a matter of fleshing it out and really going to town with the details and the uh,
So like all of the plating came afterwards. That was something that like once you got approval for like a general character design, you went in and like gave him all of that beautiful scaled texture and like
right.
the spikes, like the I don't know how what would you call them? They're almost like pole spikes, almost like along his back. They
Yeah,
almost
the
look
kind
like
of conical kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah, conical spikes and things, and armor plating, of course. And like right now, I'm showing some old photos. It's a shame that we didn't take a lot more photos back then. It was just the the the, the emphasis was on getting the job done more than worrying about photography.
Mhm.
There's no social media. There's no like they weren't really promoting this stuff
One of the things that
the same way.
I've always loved about Draco are how his horns frame his face. Was there
Yeah,
like a conscious decision about how his horns on his head were going to be laid out?
yeah, for sure. There was the sense that he was kind of a kingly and like a regal figure. That way, we're going to use the horns almost like a crown. Um, a lot of the design tips and suggestions came from Phil, and also the visual effects designer, supervisor Craig Hayes was there. He's a great designer. And so if you look at Draco straight on, there's a lot of directionality to the horns. They're not just randomly placed here and there. There's an attempt to guide the eye towards um, the center of the face
Hmm.
from the direction the horns go. So that's almost like a
He
bunch of
also has
arrows.
kind of like a ridge line right above his nose, above his snout too. That
Hmm.
again, it like was that driving people towards the center of his face and his eye line again.
Uh, yeah, I mean, all of it was, we were looking at it and taking photographs in different angles and different lighting situations, trying to guess how it would be filmed. So it's like, let's make sure the eyes have a good read that is clear, and let's make sure they don't get lost. So you're kind of when you're sculpting, you're using shadows and light to kind of see where these things fall, and you know how they emphasize the various features. Um, I learned years earlier, how to use really harsh lighting on your sculpture to kind of get a clear view of where shadows go, and what those shadows do to the look of your design. But yeah, in terms of framing the face, definitely. And we knew that there was going to be a lot of close-ups, so the point was to really work on
Get
that
that face
character
right.
read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really
uh,
like the wings on Draco too. So in that maquette that you have right there with the outstretched wing,
hmm
I looked at some of your maquettes and I didn't realize it until I looked at them that Draco has some purple and almost feather-like projections coming off of his wings. Did those
hmm
make it into the final cut? Because I watched the film recently and I didn't see them. I did notice, however, that they were on the toy line. So
there were a couple of feathers on the wings, or feather-like, blade-like, kind of hard. They're like long scales, I think.
mhm,
Um, and I'm
almost
pretty
like
sure,
calloused memory from rubbing against the scales.
yeah, they're just sort of like elongated scales along the base of the wings that were almost trying to be feathers.
Hmm.
Um, I think that made it in. I haven't watched it for a while, so now I'm a little fuzzy on that. The big thing about the wings was like we wanted to make them as big as possible so that it wouldn't look silly that this thing could hover and fly, and at the
You
same
didn't want
time,
him like a hummingbird.
well, one big thing is they needed to fold up small enough
Hmm.
that he could fit through certain areas and that the wings wouldn't dominate every shot. So there's a kind of an accordion folding trick to kind of cheat it smaller when they're closed. Um, I think it's still a bit of a hard sell that those wings could hold him up in the air. So it's a bit of you know
I think that the
suspension
animators did a
suspension
great
of belief.
job with
But
that because they had him like gyrating in the air. He's really like flexing when he does it. I think that that
yeah,
helped sell it quite a bit.
that really helps sell it. I think I would bet that they cheated the scale when appropriate
Yes, they definitely did.
to
I've
to
seen
shrink
that.
to shrink them down when it was the right time and stuff like that. Um, yeah, the wings were definitely a challenge. On the big maquette, um, there's a guy named Ron Holthausen, who's also sculpting on this job, and he kind of sculpted the big, you know, wing for the scanning model. Um, because we just had to crank this thing out. We didn't have much time to sculpt the large scanning model. And that was another point for making these maquettes was ultimately to have a large version of the maquette to bring on set for lighting reference, and to give to ILM so they can build the actual 3D models. Let's see if I keep
No, they
going
look
down.
brilliant. I also love the color palette that Draco has. He's just like a lovely shade of like gold and brown with a few highlights there. And I think again that goes towards regal rather than
Yeah,
scary dragon vibes.
that was Phil's idea, was to kind of give this metallic quality to
Again, going back to
some of
your
the scales.
knight.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was a great thing that he came up with, and made him kind of unique. Yeah, this particular thing that I'm showing now visually is, I think ILM gave it the nickname of Tippett's Revenge, and the reason being there was so much surface detail that modeling this was a pain in the butt for them. Um,
Oh, that was it was
they
a petty revenge to put a gazillion scales in for the animators, was it?
Well, it's not only the scales, but like the amount of in and out and surface relief and the number of
Mhm.
parts and spikes and all this stuff. It was like kind of pushing the limits of what could be rendered and animated back then. It was a lot of information. I think I heard the statistic that this the Draco model, the full high res model, had more vertices or somewhat close to all the amount of polygonal. Well, I don't think it was polygons. I think it was NURBS back then, but it had as much vertex information as all the Jurassic Park dinosaurs put together in terms of
Wow.
the size of the model. So things were advancing quickly, but yeah, I heard stories that the guys modeling this thing hated it because it was just like so much work. And the honest truth is like I had no idea. I was just trying to design something cool looking. Um, it was never intentionally overly complicated.
What's your favorite design aspect about Draco?
I just think the face works for what it was intended. We knew we didn't want to have just a beak that opened and closed, and
Hmm.
you know, um, this voice would come out magically from kind of a static reptile, non-moving mouth. I think early on we knew that the lips would have to move to a certain degree to kind of sell the speech. One thing we looked at a lot was apes.
Oh, really?
Uh, yeah, there's kind of if you look at them straight on, there's kind of a swoop to the line of the mouth that kind of turns up like a gorilla.
I
Uh,
was about to say.
and I'm just going to turn off something real quick.
There we go. So we've had a few questions for you, good sir, that have come from our listener base.
Gotcha.
And there's a variety here. There's no necessary rhyme or reason to them.
Sure.
So we have M. Bryant, and her question is there any dream project that you would have loved to have worked on but didn't get the chance?
Hmm. Uh, I'd really love to work on the Dune projects, Dune films. Uh, I can't go back in time on work and work on the original Star Wars, unfortunately. That would be something for sure. Um, but yeah, working with I was working on a dream project with Guillermo del Toro years ago that got put on the shelf for later. So it's like I've gotten very close to working on quote unquote dream projects.
Can we hear what that
Um,
dream project may have been?
oh, that was Mountains of Madness, the
All right, yeah.
Lovecraft film, and I think it's all public knowledge that we were working on that, so it's not like a secret or anything.
Hmm.
Uh, but that was working with one of the greatest guys on one of the coolest projects for sure. Yeah, it's just a shame that it had to be put away for later. Maybe I'll get another chance sometime in the future.
Well, here's hoping. I was quite interested in that project, to be fair. So Dawn has conversely asked, have there been any projects that you wish that you hadn't gotten involved in or turned out to be a nightmare?
Yeah,
You can
plenty.
a bit political that question, but I'll rephrase it. What project would you say was the most work that you weren't anticipating?
Oh, I might have to pass. I think the projects that were like that were projects that I was on as an animator. Uh, when you work at a studio that does visual effects and you don't always get to choose what you work on because the company needs to take what comes in the door and
Hmm.
sign people as they see fit. And sometimes you get put on something you're not super excited about, but it pays the bills.
Yeah.
There've been a few of those where it's like you're working with as an animator as well. So I did a lot of different films in that role. There were plenty of them where it was frustrating to say the least. And there's been a few design jobs as well where you're working for someone who doesn't really have a good eye and really doesn't know how to articulate what they want. and you have to keep a smile on your face and be helpful and try hard to please the person that doesn't really know what they're doing. They might be very high profile too, so you have to be kind of cautious as to how you react. So these things have come up once in a while, and they're they're not quite nightmares because you're still making neat stuff for a living, even if it's not your favorite job.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's not a great experience, and unfortunately for films, they have to get finished and released, so
So
it
the
doesn't
blunt
go on
feedback on
forever.
something you might have put your heart and soul into, that can get tough.
Blunt feedback or ideas that you know in your gut are bad ideas, but you have to go with them anyway because you don't have the authority to challenge somebody on their thoughts, because you're just an
I
underling.
hear you.
Um,
So,
yeah, it's a service job too. You're trying to realize someone else's vision, and sometimes you don't agree with it.
right. So we have a few more questions. So Paul asks, Peter, you've worked on some of my favorite movies, Jurassic Park, Tremors 2, Starship Troopers, to name just a few. Could you share a behind the scenes story from one of these movies that serves as an endearing memory?
Oh my gosh, you gotta tell me these in advance. Uh,
that's not fun. It's only fun if you answer them candidly.
I have a terrible memory. I mean, there's plenty of cool memories, like being on location with Starship Troopers and while
You
they're
went to
filming.
Clendathu?
Exactly, yeah, Casper, Wyoming. Um, that kind of stuff is always great memories, but endearing memories. I would have to say the times that I've worked with Guillermo, I've been there've been a lot of those moments because he's such a unique and special dude, and
He's definitely a creature designer at heart, too. You can
he's
always
an
tell.
artist. Yeah, he's an artist underneath. He's like a when you work with him as a professional geek like we are, that he's like one of the group. He's not like apart from that. He loves the stuff just as much as you do. So, and he's a very warm guy. So just hanging out with the guy and, going to lunch and things like that. And his reaction to your creativity is always extremely heartwarming and encouraging because he's just so excited about it. He'll like take you by the head and shake you because he's so excited about and jazzed about what you're doing. And nobody else does that. So that's pretty endearing. He's just like this.
That's really wholesome, too. That's
Yeah, I mean,
awesome.
he's like he can't contain his emotions sometimes when he's really into what you're doing, and he'll just give you a huge bear hug. And that happened a couple of times, and it's like, holy crap, what's going on? This is so unusual for a in a work situation. And then you're like, you just really love the guy for it because he's so genuine.
There we go. All right. So Brandon's asked a question that we've kind of already answered. Just out of curiosity, were there any early concept designs for Draco's look? And how long did it take for the final design? Which I guess we didn't answer fully. How long was Draco, would you say? Was it a few weeks, a few months to
Well,
come up with the final design?
that final large maquette, the body and head part, I remember I had 5 weeks to sculpt.
Wow. That's awesome. But
And
that's
then
really impressive. You pulled that off so quickly.
well, we kind of had the blueprint of the smaller maquette, so it was a matter of doing a neutral pose and blowing it up. And it was, it's like trial by fire because I didn't really know what I was doing. I hadn't done anything like that, so it was a lot of late nights. But we did, and Ron was doing the wing at the same time, which is also a challenge because that was a tricky design. But the sculpture part, I remember taking 5 weeks, and then another couple of weeks to get a hard copy out. This guy, Danny Wagner from ILM, did the mold making for us, and then another 2 or 3 weeks to paint up the first copy of that large maquette. And yeah, it was a marathon amount of work. It was a 2.5+ months to get that from start to finish, not including the early design process. So it's yeah, it was a lot of work, um, and it was kind of a lot of it was just me alone in a the shop until the wee hours. trying to get it done.
All right. So we have one final one for you here. It's Tom. So Tom says, Peter, I grew up watching this movie and it's an absolute classic. What inspired you to come up with the visual appearance of Draco, which we've kind of touched on? I believe a lot more modern day dragons, such as Game of Thrones and even Monster Hunter, have taken small snippets from the visuals of Draco to create their Drogons and Rathaloses. So, massive shout out to you for inspiring the next generation of dragons.
That's
So,
cool.
yeah, Tom's a really lovely bloke. He regularly asks us questions. I will ask though, kind of off his question, do you have a dragon that you've seen recently that really struck your fancy and thought that was a really cool design, or just dragons cool in general?
Uh, I don't remember the name of the dragons, but the ones that they were riding and flying in Lord of the Rings. Do you remember those? Their names
The
with the
fell
dark.
beasts, the Nazgul ride.
Yeah, over the swamplands.
Yeah,
I
they are
thought those are
literally just
incredibly
called.
cool, and yeah, they
They are
were
just
incredibly
fell
subtly done.
beasts.
Fell
They are,
beasts.
yeah, they are great. Yeah,
I mean,
I'm so,
the recent ones are all fantastic. I mean, they're so sophisticated, and the level of detail they're able to get in them is incredible now. The just like it's limitless how sophisticated and high quality this stuff can be now. It's like I'm jealous of the guys. I know some of the guys who worked on the Game of Thrones stuff, and the Emmys and things they won are well deserved. Um, I can't pick a favorite really. They're all pretty impressive. Um, the old days, yeah, or older days, the Lord of the Rings version was pretty impressive. Uh, I almost got a chance to work on the Hobbit when Guillermo was attached to it, so that would have been exciting too. But unfortunately, that those plans changed for him at a certain point. Um, at least I got the job offer. I wasn't able to take it. But
that's an
yeah,
interesting
I
dragon
can't.
too. Smog,
Huh?
it's an interesting dragon and design too, because Smog originally had the 4 feet like Draco does and wings. And you can see that in The Hobbit when he's knocking down the door, because the special effects shots that were used at the time have his paws. But,
Right,
you know, in the later films, he just has the handy wings.
right.
Oh,
Yeah,
there's your Smog.
this is
Wow.
this is a version I did just for fun, in my free time years and years ago, and I had worked on it. The reason I got in touch with Guillermo is because I was working on something that he had produced, and I asked the director to slip him this drawing I did when I heard that Guillermo was possibly doing The Hobbit, and that's how I got to meet and start working with him. Now this is based on nothing. It's like I hadn't even read the books, so I just said I'm going to just do a dragon and see if I can send it over to him.
I get the
Um,
impression you didn't know that Smog talked, looking at his mouth.
well, this would be the magical kind of talking without a
All
bunch of
right.
lips.
Well, I think you can get away with it because macaws talk without lips, don't they?
Sure, and it can be magical and effective that way. But yeah, that would have been a fun thing to be part of, but wasn't to be.
Okay, so we had one more question, which I asked in advance. This doesn't necessarily come to you, Peter, but we had to tap Patrick Reed Johnson for this. And it was, what is Draco's real name? Now,
Mm,
before I give you Patrick's answer, you are welcome to give Draco a real name if you want.
it
But
doesn't have one.
yeah,
Uh,
he doesn't have one. That's the gag. So Patrick came out and he kind of shocked a few of us. So he never actually decided, this is quote, so never actually decided on a specific name. And in point of fact, I always held that dragons, like other animals other than humans, had no real purpose for proper names, but would instead be identified by their sounds or behaviors.
mm,
And I felt Draco's rather prideful remark about human language being insufficient to the task of pronouncing his name might have actually been his way of avoiding having to admit that he, in fact, did not actually have a name, which I thought was very cheeky and in keeping with the character. But
Boy, some
that's a
people really put some thought into this stuff. It's I'm sure a lot of the people that listen to this know a lot more about the film and all the lore and everything surrounding it than I do. It's people get so deep into this stuff. For me, it's like
Yeah,
these are exciting jobs, but then you move on because you're busy, and you don't focus as much on it. But yeah, that's cool to hear. I had no idea, and I always thought that the name Draco was kind of odd anyway, because isn't it just like, you know,
just
another word
Latin
for,
for dragon. Yeah,
well, yeah, it's
he
pretty
does make that comment in the film, to be fair. But from what I understand, Rob Cohen, and you may be able to corroborate this a little bit, there was originally supposed to be a lot more Star Dragon in Dragonheart. So,
Star Dragon meaning.
so when Draco, when he's basically talking with Bowen about how they're swindling,
Uh,
townsfolk,
right.
and he's twirling through the air and whatnot. Rob Cohen knew the end of the story, and he knew that Draco was essentially going to turn into star stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So his thought process was that as Draco was twirling, he would momentarily become a little bit ethereal and be a
Mm,
little bit star stuff while he was doing this.
gotcha.
So again, the whole star mentality and Draco being given that name, he probably would have been okay with it. But as the lore goes on during that production meeting, I think Tippett was like, "You do realize that's not going to work." So it just went to Draco with just aerial acrobatics and then landing to walk next to Bowen, because doing the star effect twirling took it a little bit out there.
That would
Whereas,
add to the budget a little bit too much.
yeah, and then like you save it for that big finale too, where he does become star stuff. Sorry,
Yeah.
folks, spoilers. But in terms of like the lasting effect of Dragonheart, I think that it is a testament to the film that if you go on IMDb, there are 97,658 IMDb users who have taken the time to rate Dragonheart.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's actually got a pretty darn high rating. The median rating is 7, which is definitely a lot better than a lot of other Dragon films. For sake of argument, I actually went and looked at Reign of Fire
Hmm.
versus Dragonheart, because both of them,
I really enjoyed that one.
Reign of Fire is a great film. And if it had been released at a later date, I am confident Christian Bale, Gerard Butler, and
Matt.
Matthew McConaughey
Yeah.
would have drawn loads of crowds. Likewise, if Dragonheart had been released today with effectively half the Harry Potter cast, that's an exaggeration, folks, but you'll see when you look at the cast, like
Yeah, they're
when
not
they're
quite.
in there, like if it was to be released today, people would gobble that up.
Yeah.
So when you rate them side by side, Dragonheart actually ascends past Reign of Fire. And speaking in demographics wise, it's also split very evenly down the middle in terms of how much both male and female audiences have enjoyed it, because it does have fairly significant and strong female characters in
Mhm.
Dragonheart. And there isn't necessarily a romantic attachment there either. It's just a strong female character in her own right. So, in terms of passing a lot of tests, like we said, like in terms of it may not be overtly family friendly, but it does have that Goonies sort of vibe where there's like an element of risk, but at the same time, it's quite fun. And
Yeah.
then it also
Well, they
has the
definitely had to.
effects.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
definitely had to keep big effects films into the family PG realm back then. I think a rated R is kind of a kiss of death for those kinds of movies. So they did.
Yeah.
They definitely had to think in terms of big audience. Yeah. It's cool that people still remember it fondly.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's a
some
lot
of it
of
doesn't
fun.
hold up for me as far as filmmaking goes. I mean, some of it's a little bit, you know.
Oh, now you've kicked over a rock.
Yeah.
What? What?
I mean, it's lots of little things. It's like, Dennis Quaid had an accent for about 10 minutes of the film and disappeared, kind of like, Princess Leia.
A bit of a Men in Tights
Um,
sort of thing going on there. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, are you Scottish or nope, nope, it's back to American California guy.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing. It's like it's a special effects driven films are, you know, getting something that's fun eye candy and a good film at the same time is not as common as people would think. I've worked on so many really fun to work on movies that weren't actually good films. You
Mhm.
just kind of you do it because you love the craft more than anything else, and you really hope it's going to be good. But you know, if you work on, you know, like I've worked maybe on 50 something movies, maybe closer to 60, and it's such a small percentage of them that um, are actually good movies. you know, they're entertaining, but in terms of high quality filmmaking, it's you're lucky if you get like this 7 or 8 rating that Dragonheart got, and yeah, it's cool though. It feels good. I hear from people once in a while that it meant a lot to them, and that they saw it when they were like 10-year-old kids and stuff, and um, it's cool because that's what got me into this stuff too, is being a 10-year-old kid seeing Star Wars and being completely blown away and inspired to chase a weird dream and um, you know try to get into that stuff. So it's kind of cool to have a little piece of something that also inspired other people.
I think if 97,000 people give an overwhelmingly positive response
Yeah,
and
who bothered?
many cite the dragon as being one of their favorite bits, I think you
Yeah, yeah,
definitely touched on fame there. I will
yeah.
say I recently showed Dragonheart to my kids, and Draco was at the center of many of their favorite gags throughout the movie. The one that I think had them all in stitches was "It doesn't get any deeper" when he goes into the river and he's expecting to swim away, quote unquote, dead,
Oh
but it's
yeah,
not deep enough for him to get away. And all of like the guys are like, meat. So that was good. They also really enjoyed the giant roar scene where Bowen is saying, "Would you rather, this happen, or would you like to deal with him?" And then, of course, on cue, Draco gives an almighty roar, spits flames, and waves his wings around like in an overly dramatic gesture. Like now that you've
yeah.
known him, I think my I think one of my favorite gags in Dragonheart was a very subtle one, but it's a thing where you'd almost expect a dragon to do, and it's a great character moment for Draco. It's when they're sitting down, like when they're around that campfire, Draco and Bowen, and Draco's just watching Bowen make fire, which for him is the simplest thing in the world. He's just pondering, like, wow, these guys really have to go through a lot of effort to do this, don't they? He's like,
Yeah.
really can. I could. And then Bowen gets up for a second, and then Draco just puts his pinky like over one nostril, and says,
Yeah.
which I really enjoyed. But I think that Dragonheart's real magic, and you did a fantastic job with creating that character.
Yeah, we did a lot of Tippett Studio did a lot of animatics and previs for that movie as well. So a lot of that stuff was sort of scoped out at our studio. Some of the bigger sequences were done in kind of a low res CG sort of form. So yeah, there's some good gags in there and some good
Some
ideas.
great gags.
Maybe needs a reboot someday. That's good quality.
Oh, has it been rebooted? There are a
They've
few
tried.
direct releases, we'll call them.
I can't even look at them.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember being enormously excited for the second one and watching it, feeling somewhat deflated at the end. However, some of the latter ones,
I don't think I got to the end on that.
yeah, some of the latter ones, like because there's 5 Dragonheart movies now.
Oh, are there?
Um, yeah, so that may come as a shock to some folks, but there are some where they kind of go back a little bit to like the root mythos, but I don't think any of them touch on the character development that Draco had or the facial expression that you gave the character. Because when you look at the other dragons, they look like dragons. Their faces are narrow. They aren't broad like Draco's. And I think some of them they took elements of Draco's design to be like proto draconic or proto Dracos, because a lot of them are in the past because Draco was presumably the last, so they would be in the past. But I don't think that they capture the same amount of magic.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, we have reached the end of this episode, so we will have to say thank you. But before we do, we will go over our favorite segment, if nothing else. where we give suggestions on things to check out. So I think we
Cool.
can both say is don't check out the sequel to Dragonheart. You might be able to look at some of the latter ones on Wikipedia and decide for yourself, but maybe not the sequel.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe people have time to kill. Yeah, what's to check out? I don't know, man. I'm watching the same things everyone else is, in terms of entertainment and all that stuff goes. People should definitely check out the place I work for, Cauldron Studios, which is under the umbrella of Probably Monsters, which is a new game studio up here in the Seattle area. And so they're putting out all kinds of great games soon. It's like a brand new company, so it's lots
And
of
what's the
stuff in
name of this company?
the overarching the parent company is Probably Monsters.
Probably Monsters.
Yes, and the studio within that parent company that I work for is called Cauldron, and that's we're a new company making a new game, and if people are game artists out there, various kinds, they can check out the jobs page and see what we're hiring for. Still, there's still positions of all kinds.
Oh,
Uh,
fantastic.
Other than that, I'm just trying to, I work I do a lot of concept art these days and 3D stuff, and I'm trying to keep putting things out into the world through social media and ArtStation, and so people can check my stuff out there. Um, just under my name on ArtStation or Konig Arts, Instagram and Twitter. Um, but yeah, other than that, what cool stuff is out there to check out? I don't know. What have you
Well,
heard?
I will give our listeners something niche to hunt for. So there was
Hmm.
actually a Dragonheart novelization, and it
Hmm.
was by Charles Edward Pogue, and it was based on the screenplay, which Patrick kind of had a hand in too. But what it does is it kind of corrects one criticism of the film, which is the characters seemed a bit two dimensional, a bit cliche. There wasn't
Sure.
enough characterization time for them. Which, to be fair, the movie, it jumbles along at a nice plot pace and it's pretty cut and dry, which is, I think, why it has such a broad appeal to younger audiences and
It's
why it's such one of those
digestible.
great films that you can just turn on.
Yeah.
But anyway, it is darker, longer, and has more characterization. So it is the Dragonheart novelization by Charles Edward Pogue, and it is
Hmm.
somewhat hard to find. So if you are
Hmm.
a Dragonheart fan, you can go looking for that one. There was also a junior novelization. It's not in the same tier, apparently. But do check out Dragonheart. You can stream it on Amazon. That is the widest venue to attain it, other than just buying it by DVD or Blu-ray. Amazon, it is not included with Prime. You do have to purchase it. So it's good enough for that. Um, anyways, in terms of mythologies, which you can examine, which may have a dragon or two upcoming, you never know. I will recommend the Rings of Power, which is currently streaming on Amazon Prime. I love the books. I have read the Silmarillion. I will tote that as my token credentials. I've actually done that. I'm enjoying it. I am not diehard, but it is fun and seeing sneaky
I
references.
like their creature designs in that one. They're really nice.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen.
They took a different tack in terms of body shapes and things like that. It's really cool to see.
I do like the hint that Prince Durin gives that when they are mining for mithril, and I apologize for spoilers, folks, but they're mining for mithril, and he says, "My father has, closed off that part of the mine. We need to be very careful there." And of course, he's referring to Durin's Bane, which is the Balrog seen in the Fellowship of the Rings. So
Gotcha.
it's nice to get little nods like that in the show. So I will endorse that. I will endorse a hearty helping of Dragonheart. And if you are lucky, you can find the novelization, and Tops put out two comic books because Joe likes to recommend books that nobody can find. So, anyways, check those out. Peter is on ArtStation. You can see a load of his work, and it is absolutely fantastic. Peter, thank you again so much for coming on. We greatly
I
appreciate it.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Folks,
Thank you so much.
keep it kaiju.